Hello, class. So today we're going to be doing 503, demanding a voice, and 504, working towards equality, right, which otherwise would have occurred in November 19th and the 20th. So previously, we were talking about the conditions of African Americans after the Civil War. Right. Another group trying to achieve civil rights is women. So let's start here is the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, which was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So, at this convention, approximately 300 people attended. 2 out of 3 of them are women, and most are abolitionists. So Frederick Douglass is there. This ends up being the result of a declaration of sentiments, grievances, and resolutions that 100 attendees signed. The Declaration of Sentiments is modeled after the Declaration of Independence, in which they say, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." So, when they're arguing for this, they are initially arguing for child custody rights, property rights, and rights to an equal education that boys and men get. The most controversial plank of this is the right to vote, even within the female community. This idea that politics might specifically just be a realm for men still has some resonance. But they are talking for other types of civil rights equality, okay, in child custody, property rights, education. Now, the fight with slavery and the Civil War sort of puts women's suffrage on the back burner for a little bit. And you get to the Civil War afterwards, it's Reconstruction, and the suffrage movement is split over whether to support the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment gave Black men the right to vote. So, in some ways, because the abolitionist movement had been heavily tied with the women's suffrage movement at this point, there's a lot of support on this. But there's also an idea about who goes first in what terms. Right? Black men are going to get the right to vote for white women. So we have the National Women's Suffrage Association, 1869. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony created this NWSA. And it opposed the 15th Amendment because it did not include women. Right? They wanted to work to change the federal law to include women as well as African American men. Then you had the American Women's Suffrage Association, AWSA, and what Lucy Stone and other abolitionists formed this. And they pushed for women's suffrage on a state-by-state basis. And they supported the 15th Amendment, which passed in 1870. And it's something that we're going to see when we're talking about these movements, is that from now looking back, it might seem like they're all part of the same movement of people having civil rights, of equal rights, right, of trying to do right by society. But there were people that had divergent views. There were feminists that strongly thought women were completely equal, deserved the right to vote, but they were not racial equal. They didn't believe in racial equality. And there were Black men that were fighting for the right to vote that also didn't necessarily believe that women should be able to vote. These type of struggles and disagreements benefit the class that can already vote, which is white men. Another issue they have is apathy. Right? if you have sympathy for someone, right, you're sad about it, right? You empathize with them. You understand how they feel, right? The apathy means you just don't care. Right? It doesn't mean you dislike someone. Like, you just don't really care about the issue. And most women didn't want the vote. At this point, this is what the Nancy Wilcock is describing. The earliest suffragist efforts as a crusade in search of a constituency. Right? Kind of have a twofold pronged problem here. The first is right, that you need to convince women that they should want the right to vote. And then those that hold political power are men. So we get to the progressive era. Lots of reforms happening all over different spots. And middle-class women join clubs for self-education, to promote temperance, right, this anti-alcohol movement, to improve the communities and support charities. So the woman's sphere is going to expand. And you have the idea of social housekeeping. That since women are responsible for children and the home, that's their responsibility. But they can only properly protect their home and children if they get to improve society. And so, a lot of times, women are involved in issue work, right? Whether it be charities or social issues. Not necessarily political work. These are closely tied, but they are different. So they organize for temperance, trying to remove alcohol, safe food and drug laws. And there are a lot of women that realize that voting is the best way to affect this. And suffrage is going to increase their influence. So we get a reinvigorated suffrage movement. The NSWA and the ASWA are going to merge in 1890 to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NAWSA. Now, the thing that had diverged them before was how they felt about the 15th Amendment and whether they were going to support black men having the right to vote. Well, that's in 1870. And so they've had the right to vote for 20 years. And the South, a lot of times, their rights have been rolled back. And so the thing that divided them, it's no longer there. So they focus on a state-by-state strategy. So remember, voting rights are determined by each state. So southern states are working to try to keep African Americans in voting with grandfather clauses, poll taxes, and literacy tests. So when it comes to women's suffrage, there is nothing in the Constitution that says women cannot vote. In fact, under very specific circumstances, in the first few presidential elections, women could vote in New Jersey if it was a free white woman who owned property. And most of those are like widows. Right? Or maybe a young woman whose father had just died, inherited it. And then they changed that in New Jersey. But there's nothing specifically there. And so you can do this on a state-by-state basis because the Constitution is actually silent on it. And when the 19th Amendment passes, it prohibits anyone from being banned from voting on the basis of sex, or gender. And what this means is all women have to get the vote. It also means, in theory, the men can't be banned from voting. If we never got an 19th Amendment, in theory, men could be banned on a state-by-state level from voting. Right? But this is why they're focusing on a state-by-state strategy. Instead of amending the Constitution, because the Constitution itself is silent, you go on a state-by-state level. And so you have these states that are passing voting rights. Right? And now a lot of these are territories. Wyoming's the first territory to do this. And a lot of the territories out west are the first ones to do this. And it's somewhat of a practical matter. The people coming out there, they're going with their wives, with their families. They are working acreages that are sometimes pretty remote from one another. And the woman is being directly involved in the work and raising the children and in working the farm. And so it's easier to see how they can be made quality. There's also different levels that people start getting it to. For example, in some states, they first lobby to vote in school board elections and get that first. And this is the argument of, since it's a woman's job to make sure the children are raised to be properly educated, then they should have an impact on how the schools are running. Right? And they argue then for local elections. Right? I'm affected by sales tax and property tax. Okay, I have to do all the shopping, therefore I should be able to vote there. And then once that goes through, and a woman gets to vote in school board elections and local elections, and the world doesn't end, it's much easier to then say, let's vote in federal elections. So when we get Colorado, Utah, Idaho, all 1890s, then progressive era right before World War I is heating up. Washington, or California, Oregon, Kansas, Arizona, Montana, Nevada. So, in 1913, Alice Paul forms the Congressional Union to advocate for a federal constitutional amendment. A Congressional Union renamed the National Women's Party. And they see what's happening in the UK. When it is officially banned for women to vote, they have a very militant tactics, where they will, like, the politicians' houses get bombed in the UK. We don't have something like that in the US. But they adopt these militant strategies of picketing, these mass rallies and marches, making the men feel bad, following them around, making fun of them sometimes. As young people revitalize the push for a national amendment. All right, so all of note for us in Iowa, Carrie Chapman Catt. If you've ever gone to Charles City, they mention this as the girlhood home of Chapman Catt. So she became president of this group in 1915. And she offers the winning plan. And the plan is win enough states, and Congress will have to support a national amendment, or women will vote them out. Right, so you're winning this on a state-by-state basis. So see victories in Arkansas and New York in 1917. In 1917, it's a pivotal year. Jeannette Rankin becomes the first woman ever elected to the U.S. Congress in Montana. Because if you look at the Constitution, and it says what the qualifications are. To be in the House of Representatives, you have to be 25, you have to be a U.S. citizen, to be a resident of the state that you're elected in. She's all of those. It doesn't say man. She entered World War I. Now, there is a divide here. Once again, another issue is dividing them from the main goal. How should we deal with World War I? So NAWSA and Carrie Chapman Catt support the war effort. They believe that women will be rewarded for loyal service. Us Paul and NWP picket the White House asking for democracy at home. Right? And they can be seen as unpatriotic. So the first woman elected to Congress is Jeannette Rankin. And she votes no to going to war in World War I. And her argument is, because women cannot fight in war and only men can be drafted, it would be immoral, unethical of her to vote to send people to war when it's not her. Jeanette Reagan's gonna not get reelected. She's gonna come back in the 1940s and then be the only person that votes against World War II for those same reasons. All right, so that's an idea about the ratification fight in Tennessee, how close this is. So lobbyists converge in Tennessee for a War of the Roses. The anti-suffragists, right? So they're against women voting, red roses, pro-suffrage, yellow roses. So the state Senate passed the suffrage amendment, but the state House was still too close to call. And then we have Harry Byrne votes aye, means yes. So at 22, he is the youngest elected official, and he arrives wearing a red rose. Right? And the vote has been tied 48-48. So everyone assumes red rose means anti-suffrage. It means it's going to fit. But in his pocket is a letter from his mother. And it says, "Dear son, hurrah and vote for suffrage. Don't keep them in doubt. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat put the rat in ratification." So Iowa's own Cherry Chapman Cat. So he explains, "I knew that my mother's advice is always safest for a boy to follow. So after he votes yes, he has to flee because there's an anti-suffrage mob." Well, it says in his mom. And so in 1920, the 19th Amendment is passed. And when the 19th Amendment is passed, it means that women now will have the right to vote. And you see a huge increase in the amount of people that vote in the 1920 presidential election. Though there is not a large difference in between how men and women vote. All right, so I'm going to leave it there for today. This is what we would have covered on the 19th and the 20th.